Hello, anybody who is here? Welcome to the Air Windows Monday morning question answering stream. Generally, there are people who show up. I think there will be no difference today. One thing I should do, however, is go and get my paper for drawing things on, which I got some here. So I always seem to need to do that, and some kind of pen for drawing things with. And I have two of those. One of them is newly acquired Tombow. This is a water-based marker, so it should fume me out less. And the other one is the Sharpie that I've been using this whole time, which if I use that, it will fume me out more, because it is a solvent-based marker and gets kind of whiffy. And I got two things also up here, not counting my coffee. Which I brewed only just a moment ago, so it's really hot. One of them is the laptop that I do my work on, and I was thinking about maybe starting a plugin or figuring something out, perhaps even asking people what they'd like to see. I should take a moment to check that I actually have the stream working. There's a live dashboard to look at. And yeah, it sure looks like it's working. It's fine. Even asking people. Oh yeah. So we'll take that as read. Hey Bo, now I know somebody is here. It's going okay. Getting back into the swing of things after my week of beating myself into the ground, updating all the plugins. So the other thing that I have for my live stream today is one of these. I need to learn a little bit about transistors because I wish to make some Eurorack modules using them and sort of hardwire point-to-point wiring everything. And I've got CMOS chips, but there are useful things. Hey Gamma, there are useful things that I can do with transistors. Namely, I've run across the schematics and basic instructions for Zachary Vex Fuzz Factory, and for a couple of different Devi Ever pedals. One of them is a Silver Crank, and the other one is a Dark Energy, and I use the Dark Energy for some things. Specifically, I have, I believe it's Helios Devi Ever pedal, and that effectively is a Dark Energy running into something else, and it makes one of her, I think it makes Hyperion. Devi's Hyperion pedal is those two running one into the other. But she had a pedal called Helios that isn't made anymore, and I have one that is each of those circuits separately. So you could turn them on and off separately. And one of the things that I learned was that Devi made a lot of these pedals and might still do so. She's done like getting out of the business, selling the business, buying back the business, starting it up again, because kind of like with me in plugins, she has one key thing that really cooks with people. So if she's up a creek or in need of money or whatever, she can crank up the boutique pedal business again, and people will jump at it. There is also a time that she was going to do DIY stuff, and I would have been all over that. I'm not sure if it's still a thing. I haven't kept up as much as I might have. But the Devi pedals are very simple designs, and I like that because I do things that are very simple designs. And they use common parts. Like, there are specific parts that she repeatedly uses, and one of them is the silicon, or I suppose possibly a germanium. I'm not sure she uses germanium, but there are particular transistors that get used in the designs over and over again, which puts me into something of a quandary. Hey, I'm glad to hear that PathNutty is working for you. That is a plugin that has always worked pretty well for people, I think. I have some confidence that that one will go over well with people. But I was talking about transistors. And the thing about these boutique pedals is Devi uses many of the same parts repeatedly to make different variations, which is another thing we have in common. And I'd like to start doing hardware designs myself, but I don't want to just rip her pedals, so I'm exploring whether there are other silicon components that would work to substitute from, like this. The Fuzz Factory uses fancy, I think, new old stock germanium transistors for the proper version, but you can get a silicon transistor version, and I might be interested in exploring the way that those are wired up, because it's almost like they've made something like a Darlington pair, which is a generic kind of transistor arrangement where one bolts directly onto the other, and you can't actually patent a Darlington pair because it's too basic. And things like a fuzz face, like, I'm not sure, but it might be that the Fuzz Factory is kind of like a fuzz face where you can vary more parts of the circuit. And a lot of different people make variations on fuzz faces. So essentially what I'd like to do with regard to transistors is come up with stuff that I can be like open hardware with and be able to show people how they work, but that are just distinctive enough that they'd be more mine rather than me being like, this is my version of the API 3124 plus or whatever. As usual, I'd like to have a little bit more originality than that. And one of the things that would be worthwhile is to go and look into how transistors are done. Because the thing about those is they work in a consistent way. They're talking about things like the bias network and stuff, and self-biasing, which is not the same thing as self-dithering. And they'll talk about transconductance and things. Extrinsic transconductance may be defined as the quotient of a small heavy going. But when I look up these parts that are discovered, like, the parts in the Devi Ever pedals or the parts in, other sorts of things, often what I'll find, like I was looking up the MFAS 18 or something like that. I was looking up a FET that shows up in Devi's pedals, and I think is the one that exists in the dark energy. And I'm going, what's going on with this FET? And could I substitute it? And the answer is probably, yes, I probably could, but when I look up what the part actually is, it is maxed out in certain ways. Like a J201. A J201 JFET is a part that is increasingly difficult to get in the FET with the little individual leads for hand soldering to things. And you can get incredible quantities of the surface mount version that are super cheap. So if I can come up with a way of actually working with surface mount chips in a non-circuit board arrangement, that would be kind of amazing. But the one with leads is increasingly expensive. Like it's a $5 part, and transistors are like, this is a 26-cent part. And the J201 is the part that people use for guitar circuits and things, because it has, I'm not sure whether transconductance is still the right word, but it has an amplification function that's way greater than most other JFETs. And it has a, I guess, I'm not sure what you call it, a sensitivity. Essentially, the way that this particular part works is it's hypersensitive. It'll amplify a huge amount. Might be kind of noisy as a result of that. I'm not sure how that compares to other circuits. But it also clips easier because it's made to be so sensitive. So if you're looking for something to do with making an imitation tube circuit, you're probably going to be looking for a J201. Hey, Shauna. I am talking about some of my plugin schemes and stuff. Oh, by the way, since I'll be returning to the Minecraft server after I finish doing this Q&A, I did a little work in the nether there, and now, I've become somewhat distracted to get my records here. And my glasses are actually not helping me with this. Yeah, Sinisa Morris, if you look at its shortcut in the nether, I have now highlighted the area of it in black concrete. So it's been decorated a little bit. And then I went out and did some other, like I also did Orientalis. That is stuff where maybe I'll make it a Patreon thing where, like, if you guys get me to a Patreon level, I'll let you have access to this stuff. But this is a friend of mine. So this is what I'll be doing once I'm finished with my work for the day. Derping around making imaginary worlds. Anyways, the thing about a J201 is that it has much more sensitivity than most FETs, so you can't just swap another FET into it and be like that'll be just as good, because it would not clip nearly as easily and it wouldn't have nearly as much gain. It would just plain not work. Oh, by all means ask. This is this Q&A stream is for people to interrupt or ask me whatever they want. Here's the thing with the sample rate converter. There's a series of things about it. One, you can already do fine with sample rate conversion because the optimal way of doing it is a technique called sinc interpolation, S-I-N-C interpolation. And that has existed in the freeware program Audacity for many, many years now. In fact, an older version of it that gave 3 different, like, low, medium, and high quality conversion levels was using a code library called Secret Rabbit Code that was peculiarly good, just amazing sounding. And I think current versions of it still offer sync interpolation. So you can get the sample rate converter of your dreams for free, as long as you can run an Audacity or find something else that does this particular technique. It's a simple mathematical technique, and I think I've drawn it out on papers before. The second thing is, in order to do a sample rate conversion properly, I would need to be working on a bit stream and outputting a different bit stream. And neither Audio Unit nor VST will do that for me. I don't have the technology to, I mean, it's really not possible to do like a sync interpolation and then output it at the original sample rate, but it designed to be like bit crushed down to, you can't just convert it over, and you can't just run a plugin on like a 96K stream and then output 44.1K. It's still going to be 96K. Nothing that my plugin will do will be able to change that. I could change the sound, I could alter the frequencies of it, but it's not going to be doing the same thing. So for that reason, the plugins that I build can't do that. So there's a sort of a two-level answer there. On the one hand, the plugins that I work with can't do it. And on the other hand, I know of ways to do it what I consider more or less perfectly. The sync interpolation technique, you can choose how wide of a window you use on it and sort of do a balance between how steep the cutoff is. Because here, I might as well put this transistor manual because I'm honestly not going to be able to read it on stream. I guess I was just showing it. I was just showing it to you guys. It's got all these things like, you know, power. Oh, look at a computer transistor. Get enough of these, and you could build a computer. This book is a year older than I am. This book was made in 1967. So yeah, when they say computer transistor, they do mean it, but you might find this is not the most up-to-date thing. But people don't seem to make this kind of stuff anymore. This kind of information. I think a lot of people keep that more under their hats these days rather than trying to publicize. RCA was very good about producing a lot of that stuff. They made books on transistors. They made books on tubes. They listed all the different kinds of parts that you're going to find. But yeah, and now we'll see how the Tombow works. So the ideal here is if your frequency goes upwards to the point where the sampling rate gives out. Bo has an interesting question. Ideally, you want it to literally stop at this point, and if your frequency response goes beyond this point, it's going to reflect backwards into aliasing. And the thing about sync interpolation is it's very good at getting up to there. And if you do sync interpolation over a very small number of samples, it's called low quality, but it's faster to execute. And you'll get a roll-off that starts rolling off faster, but it'll also be less processing. And, oh, you're thinking, yeah, I'll catch up with that in a moment. Whereas with sync interpolation, if you do lots of samples for it, you wind up getting very, very close to the maximum possible frequency and then still completely rejecting what's not supposed to be there. So the sort of beat to death answer for the sample rate conversion is I'd rather use the one in the free software that I have access to. I'd rather use the one in Audacity. And I have even found a macOS music playback thing which will play FLACs that's lossless compressed called COG. And COG also is able to use sync interpolation, so I can play back 96K stuff, and it'll do a better job of sample rate converting than the default macOS stuff, which will automatically sample rate convert it if you don't. Let me look over the commentary as it's going. Hi, Bernard. So, how Nelson Pass would make a fuzz? It'd probably be a fuzz face or something like that. It'd probably be the simplest arrangement of transistors. And I might experiment with doing that sort of thing. We will see. Yeah, and I have seen that the database or the website there, infinitewave.ca, is a very good resource for looking at that kind of stuff. If you can interpret how they show their little charts and things, it's very helpful. And sync interpolation shows off very well under those circumstances. You can look up which ones to use that way. I'm going to bounce forward a little bit for Jolie. I'm glad you're liking Paf Nutty. I get that output level would be a thing, but you're overlooking the fact that it already has wet dry fader, because in wet dry is the wet dry fader. So like I get the output level concern. But the wet dry fader is already there. Honestly, it really is. If you wanted to use it as such, then never go to the invert side of things, but that's literally what that is. Or maybe what you're looking for... I say that so glibly, and yet at the same time, it's like maybe you're looking for canceling out the bass audio entirely so that you end up with only the overtone. Is that what you mean? Because I'm pretty sure it doesn't do that. And I wouldn't say it was impossible. In fact, if I made it, I would have to call it Paf Nuttier, because you'd often have complete garbage in the full wet. Is that what you're talking about, Jolie? You want it to go to full wet? I've not been using it in that way, but far be it from me to tell people how to use the stuff that I do. I'll keep an eye out for your answer on that. Reese Hammett. Is it a stored to undistored thing? Something real consoles do? That's a tricky question. Oh, you certainly wouldn't want to use it at full wet on the master bus. Gads, no. So Reese, the thing about distort and undistort is that it is using that to approximate a behavior. I'll use the flip side of this page. Figure out how I can draw this. You got a waveform, and the distort causes it to be quieter because it's distortion, and then the undistort puts it back to what it originally would be. But when they're working on multiple waveforms, like you've got this other waveform that's going through here, and they interfere with each other, what ends up happening is you'll have this one waveform that is going through positive, negative, and such, and it's supposed to be regenerated back to its full size, but if it had this other thing interfering with it so that it was at a lower combined voltage level, it won't reconstruct to the same level. It will reconstruct to a smaller level, and that is designed to handle a situation that could exist and might not be as big of a thing as you'd think in real consoles, because real consoles have this that I'm currently drawing. Real consoles have amplifying stages where you've got your input, and then the transistor or whatever is doing the amplifying goes along and then puts the output. And on a mix bus for a console or something like that, what you'll have is the amplifying stage going through a resistor and they'll each have their own resistor going to the mix bus that both connect them all together, just wires together all the resistors, and then very possibly an output resistor after that. Not necessarily, but that could be one of the ways of doing it. Circuit designers like to include stuff like that. They like to include extra little resistors to keep everything behaving itself, which isn't always what you want. Here's the thing. If each of these has its own distortion measurement, and that actually makes it look like they're Schottky transistors, but let's pretend they're not. If that's a distortion measurement for each one, and it goes this loud and no louder, and they're running through this thing, this one is going strongly positive, and this one is going strongly negative. What's going to happen is they're going to try to cancel each other out. And if this is total positive, this is total negative, the influence that they should have on the output bus is 0. They should cancel each other out. But if, say, this one is doing its positive thing, this one is doing its strongly negative thing, and this one is close to clipping, it would be like this. With nothing else happening on the output bus, this one that's going positive will go like this. It will end up clipping. If this one is pulling it strongly negative, that's not actually making it any easier on this one to push its positive. All it's doing is taking voltage away from the output, and depending upon how this is wired, like if these resistances are very small and this resistance is very large, this becomes a short circuit. It tries to do this if the resistances aren't big enough. And the bigger the resistors are, the more noise you get on the bus, so it's this balancing act. So if this one's trying to push a positive and this one's pulling from being a negative, you will end up getting a distortion factor kind of like this. Like the distortion that one can produce depends upon where this one is putting the level of the bus. And that is exactly what console does in math, is put a distortion and then have the distortion increase if the bus is trying to be more negative. Okay. Bernard is mentioning, and people can read it because I have the window on screen, that I should use new cards for things. And you're right, I should. I have enough paper. I'm not going to run out of paper. This is easy to get. So yeah, the answer to Reese's question about do real consoles do this distort undistort thing? No, they don't have math in them, but there's a mechanic in there in analog consoles that will cause a channel's amplifying stage to be stressed more under certain conditions, and that parallels what the math stuff does. So the answer is kinda. The answer is real consoles do a thing that I'm modeling by doing that, but it's happening through a different mechanism, and I wonder very much as to whether I'm wondering whether you can make a analog console that does that on purpose. Say, let's see, one of these. This is a 4049 hex inverter chip, or at least I think it is. You tell me, is this a 4049 hex inverter chip or not? But it's an unbuffered hex inverter chip, so that you talk about saving the trees, and yet my wood stove is still warm from this morning. So the thing about a hex inverter chip, the 4049, is that it distorts super easy. This thing really does a soft tube-like or beyond tube-like distortion. It's just really spongy. And you can do useful things with that. And it's used in a famous Craig Anderton circuit design called the Tube Sound Fuzz, which is where I discovered it and where I started doing all this kind of thing. I have made lots of strange little guitar pedals in my day and may very well end up doing that again. Or they may be more Eurorack module things at the moment, but there could also be guitar pedals as well. That just takes more infrastructure. Guitar pedals requires like aluminum cases and the right kinds of foot switches and stuff. But you see what I'm getting at? With something like this, if I know that the output of this distorts real easy and just falls over in soft clips incredibly smoothly, but also incredibly intensely, if I wire the 6 stages of the hex inverter, or 5 so that it can be same polarity, or the full 6, through an internal resistor network that has not even remotely enough resistance, so that all of the little hex inverter chips that are already rather feeble are just getting nuked by, that, or I could run them into some kind of transistor so that the output of the bus would be better. I might be able to make a analog six channel mixer, a 6-channel to mono mixer that had an exaggeratedly console-like sound, but in analog. And that'd be a real interesting experiment. I mean, it could go beyond that. If it worked out really well, you could just sort of carry it onwards, like 6, 12, 12, 18, 24, and you could just make a large number of mixing channels, and they'd all run in these horrible little easily overwhelmed hex inverter things. So it would be a real grungy sounding mixer, but it would be a mixer that exaggerated that effect. And who knows? I mean, it would be really funny if I did that and ended up making this horribly broken mixer that still had like magical sound quality, so that it would have this very consoled out mix. There's a number of things that I do that would work with that. Like I have ideas on how to do LCR mixing and have really good crosstalk rejections, that they'd have very wide output. As far as how far I am with the DIY Eurorack, what I have at the moment is basically stuff like this. I got sidetracked into updating all the plugins, for which I'm sure people are grateful. And I've been consistently, wherever I can, thanks to the Patreon, this is how I can do this, otherwise it would not be happening. But I do things like get, $26 worth of 100 of these chips, and I find a different one, and then get 100 of those, and so on. Most recently, I got these little shrouded headers, and that's a really important part of making DIY Eurorack stuff, because if you're assembling something like that, you would want to either have it be flipped or come up with a way to put it on here, possibly get a little needle nose pliers and sort of quinch these together so that it stays on, and then solder stuff, and have your power supply be able to connect into this little shrouded header so that it would work like a real Eurorack box rather than having some kind of power cable soldered right onto it. And with all that kind of stuff, you gotta, get the polarity of it right and so on. I have a handy thing about that, because since I have a Eurorack case, I can use that as my reference for what counts as correctly powering. It's like I'll plug into that, and then if it blows up my DIY thing, then I know that I wired it up wrong. And if it powers it correctly, then I have the orientation of the header and everything correct, and I can go from there. I mean, the thing about analog mixers, you know, I recommend the one that I've got. I recommend if you can find the Roland M16E, although it does have major problems with it. All of my channel on and off switches have gone super intermittent. Stick things together. I think that depends. Like, you can stick these into a experimenter board. I've even got one. But the thing about experimenter boards is that they're also, some call them like liar boards, in that you can wire stuff together by just sticking things into the little, I'll show you. You want to see? Gotta ditch the headphones and go and fetch an experimenter board. Fortunately, it's right over here, so not particularly hard to go find. Yeah, so the board of this is something that I bought. Actually, it's Radio Shack experimenter socket, but you can get these through electronic wholesalers as well. You can get small ones for pretty cheap, actually. And a lot of these wires came from Bastel Castel. This thing that I have soldered actual jacks into, and I have my little arrangement, and that's the Lincane aluminum stuff is holding it all in place. I replaced all the need for plugging these little jumpers in, but it is made to use the little jumpers off the surface of those. Those are really good for experimenters to get into. You can get one of those. They have a new version which has slightly more features to it. And solder together the bits of it so that you have a working kit, and that'll show you how to solder. But then the jumper cables in the default one, plug into those little places, and it's the same technology as this. Now the challenge with sticking these things together instead of soldering, you've got the experimenter board, and you can plug into all these things, and they are essentially little connector strips going this way. So like if I had this cable and I plugged it like this, this is plugged into the same connection. And the way you do it is you plug your chip into there, like down the center strip, and then you say take the power supply, and you run that to some kind of power supply, and just do little jumpers like that. I initially had some jacks on here, and I could put them back if I wanted. It was a fairly decent way of working things, just a sort of little improv. But the problem is these are not great connections. So if you're building a circuit, one thing you can do is build the circuit up on this, and the more complicated it is, the more likely it is that some weird crap is going to happen. Oh, look, this is peeled back, and you can see the inside of it. Little metal clamps tucked in there. The more complicated a circuit you try to put together on this, and it'll all be kind of straight, because for multiple chips and things, you can't really put one of the chips up here because it's all connected together. They're just connect out at this central area and split off. And then these ones, I think it's exactly the same kind of part. Yeah, you can see that these little diagonal ones, these little horizontal ones, are the other orientation. And I don't believe they connect together. Like if you were going to try to make it be a big long strip of this, and you wanted the strip to be continuous all the way down, you'd have to jumper them all together like this, and that would get more and more intermittent. The connections would get worse and worse the more of these little things you had. And the more you plug into them, the more the little spring connections will fail on you. And in general, this is a thing that will give you inconsistent or incorrect results. So there's an argument to be made for not actually using these. The argument of using them is, boy, plug all of this stuff in and go. Just plug your stuff in, hook all these little cables, don't have to solder anything, and you can get a sort of vague idea of whether your thing is going to work. You can certainly test it out and find out whether the chip that you're using is oriented the right way. Like if you're not sure what this little detent on the end, if you're like, is this pin 1 or is this pin 7? You could do the experimenter board and see if you get sensible results out of it. And if you can make it work in the experimental board, then it will also work as a actual circuit and probably sound better and work better once you've actually soldered it together. The thing that I really about this perf board stuff, which is why I intended to dive really deep into it and start making stuff this way, is that it is maintainable in a way that circuit boards are not. Normally, if you're soldering stuff like this together, and you've put it into a circuit board, you need to use an IC socket, because if you don't use an IC socket, you put this thing in, you solder it down, and then how are you going to get it out? It's all completely stuck to the circuit board, which is a printed circuit board. You've got to heat it up like crazy to try to get all of the different legs to melt at once, and then to yank it out somehow. That is not the case with a perf board design using like plain wire. With a perf board design, you can unsolder one wire at a time until there is nothing soldered to the chip anymore. And the chip, we're assuming that you're replacing a chip because it died, so you don't have to worry about taking care of it. And then you can just pull the chip out. You don't need fancy desoldering or anything. If you're using point-to-point wiring, the perf board can just hold the parts in place. And then you can do individual connections using point-to-point and hookup wire. And if you needed to get even a large computer chip that was done in this way, you know, like a big square thing with way too many legs, a spider of computer chip, and you needed to replace it because it burned out or died. And that is not unthinkable because, you know, this one, if this is the one that I think it is, the 4049, that is the tube sound fuzz chip, but that is also the filter in the WASP synthesizer. And it's one of the classic Doepfer Eurorack filters, is the Doepfer WASP filter. And they're based around this 4049 chip. It has a pretty peculiar sort of grungy sound to it. It's very different from, say, a Moog filter, which is using like rail transistors. This one is using a CMOS chip that was never designed to be used that way. So it has its special grungy sound, but the WASP filter has a tendency of burning up chips, because when you use something like a 4049 and use everything as a audio amplifier, what it's basically doing is it's running all of its little parts like they were your Nelson Pass amplifier. It's running all the little parts doing maximum heat dissipation. Like if they were at 0, or here I can draw a picture. Yay, pictures. So imagine this is the input or the inside of a 4049. because it kind of is. It's kind of what it's like. What you're doing, and I don't remember the exact details of how that's done, but it's kind of like you got your input and you got your output, and these are different types of field effect transistors, FETs. And the way it works is if you have the input being strongly positive, it will take one of these, or it'll take this one, and it'll turn it off, and it'll take this one, and it'll turn it on. The output will connect through, and the one that's connecting to the plus, because remember, this is an inverter chip. It is taking pluses and making them be minuses, and it's taking minuses and making them be pluses. That's its whole purpose in life. If you've got a plus here, positive voltage, it'll cut off the access to the positive voltage, and this won't be shut off entirely. And then this will be turned on entirely, and the output will be connected to the negative supply. If you have a minus input, the minus input has an opposite effect, and it shuts off the minus FET entirely and lets all the signal go through the plus. But what happens when you have a floating input that's like a waveform and it's closer to 0? What's happening there is you are putting an output that is a louder output, but you're modulating in such a way that both of these FETs are both on and off at the same time. Like it's half on and it's half off, and one of the things that happens is a whole bunch of energy goes pumping through here as if it was one of your Nelson Pass amplifiers, as if it was a Class A amplifier. So in order to bias the thing into carrying voltages that are halfway between, like often you have to run through a capacitor. Here's a capacitor. Because the stuff that you're doing in here, then you got a resistor. It's an inverter, so if you connect the output back to the input, it forces it into the middle range, whatever that might be. Maybe the minus is ground. I can make the minus become a ground symbol because the ground symbol looks like this. So if your input is having this done to it, you need to have a capacitor on the input too, because the whole inside stage of it is going to be running at some sort of intermediate voltage. It's going to be running at like half the power supply rail. And it'll be pumping all of this voltage through as it's running, because both of the transistors are kind of half on and half off. They're both constantly working. If you were running one chip out of this, you're running one of the inverters, and you're using it as your tube sound fuzz or whatever. I think in the tube sound fuzz theory you use 2 of them. And then that 1 out of 6 is running really hot. And if it's just the one, you can get away with it. If it's just the one, just 2. Now the WASP filter, I don't remember exactly how many it uses. I think it might be using all of them, which means you have this hapless chip that's designed to work with one of these on and one of these off. And remember, if either one is completely distorted, then the voltage going across the entire thing is not happening, because something is able to stop the voltage. But if it's being held in the middle there, it's doing more power dissipation. And if all 6 of these inverters are all doing this power dissipation thing, they become very sad. And the chip heats up. It heats up like crazy. And WASP filters are known to die when they burn up. The chip literally catch fire or break or melt or something like that. In all this time, I have never seen anybody talk about putting a simple heatsink on the chip, which seems completely insane to me, because it's like, why would you not? Why would you not come up with a heatsink and put a heatsink on the chip? It is a heat issue. It can't be anything else. There is no way to make this circuit do other than what it's doing, which is dump all this voltage through. If I do the mixing board thing where I'm using them as gain stages and then going through not enough resistance so that they interact with each other strongly, it'll be the same deal. It'll be an entire chip's worth of these things, and it will most certainly go and find a way to do a heatsink so that the chip can be continually cooled down by mechanical means, just a little lump of little aluminum thing. A little block of aluminum with heat fins on it. Just the size of the chip. It doesn't necessarily have to be glued on, but I might come up with find a way of gluing it. But that's really what you need. People come up with, like, which kinds can I use that won't melt? What am I doing wrong? Is the circuit made wrong because it's melting? It's like, no, that's the way that it works. The way that the circuit works is these were never designed to be run in a bias to medium stage literally all the time. And you can do that with one or two, and if you try to do that with literally everything on the chip, well, because the WASP synthesizer exists, you can do that for a time, and it's running the chip insanely hot, and you run the risk of it melting or breaking. At which point, it becomes important, again, to have a design technology where you could desolder the chip, take it out, and replace it with another one. And in theory, you could do water cooling. You could do a water-cooled mixing board by getting lots of these, and of course, we're assuming that it's even remotely acceptable. I have a video. If anybody has if you want to hear what the 4049 used in this weird way sounds like over a bunch of stages, I have something that you can hear, but it's a noise album. Anybody who is familiar with my old prog rock music host website, I never remember what it's called because it's an experiment that kind of didn't go anywhere, and I've had to think of so many things since then that I don't remember the name of my own websites, but it'll come to me. It came to me. Crushallboxes.com. Crushallboxes.com. And that has years, because it's got all of the music that I ever made, pretty much for all of my life that I could find. And all in sort of MP3s. Some years don't have many songs done during them, often for very good reasons. Sometimes I've had very rough years. But way back in, I don't remember where, maybe I'm going to go and post it into the... I'm going to go and find the, and I have it linked. You go to the website and it shows a whole bunch of different things. And that includes album titles. So this is the one I'm going to link. And the reason I'm going to do that, I'm not going to play it for you right now. That is Heinous Noise. It is a noise album like Merzbow or something. And how it was done is, and I don't suppose I still have it kicking around, but I posted a picture of this on Instagram. It is a shortwave radio into a circuit that I built, and the circuit that I built is all based on 4049 hex inverter chip. I made a EQ out of 4049 hex inverter chip, and it's basically just using potentiometers for the knobs and switches and things, and it's running in 3 bands. And what it basically works like is like, this would be 4 bands. Say if you had I'm going to sketch on the beginning of this. Smaller and larger. They're not really drawn this way, but I'm drawing this way to indicate in pictures what I can't indicate in words. So if you have your little chips, I've got it backwards this way. Let me draw more. I'm not done drawing. So you've got your little amplifier stages, and each of them has a capacitor heading into it, because remember, if you're powering this with a bias, it has to be biased to an intermediate voltage, so all these are running at about 4.5 volts if they are at 9 volts in general. So your input stage has to be isolated from that with a capacitor, so that this can sit at a higher voltage, and then before it is not. That's not to say that you could maybe connect these together in such a way where they're an assemblage of things, and the mixing stage might be able to sit at that intermediate voltage. That might work. But in general, the capacitors block the DC. They block low frequencies as well. So if you have a small capacitor, it lets through only high frequency sounds. And then the small capacitor to the mix bus means this is bringing only the highs. And then one lower, it says larger capacitor, so it lets more low frequency sounds through. And then you have the same small capacitor that you had on the input of this. And the idea is it's trying to block what this one was letting through. So when you short it like that, from the output to the input, since it's inverting, it will act like a filter. It'll be a low-pass filter, this will. And the capacitor all by itself is a high-pass. So with a slightly larger high-pass and then a low-pass on top of that, this ends up being a bandpass, and this is a medium band. And a still larger one here, and this one matches this one. You have another band that's even lower than that. And then a really big capacitor for letting through bass, and then this one is the medium one, and then you have a low-frequency filter. And then they go through the mixing part, and then other capacitors on the output. And so you have a EQ where you can you can control different frequency bands with knobs and make them louder or softer. And it works in the same way that a mixing board would. You could even do an elaborate mixing board where you had these, and you were also summing the same thing with multiple channels. And in that case, that'd be real interesting, actually. That might be such a crazy idea that it would work. You'd have your high frequencies, and there would be that console effect where you'd be able to take one channel's high frequencies and suck the energy out of them by another channel's high frequencies that are going to a different level. There's a thought. It's worth making a note of. I'll call that idea Matrix EQ Mixer, because it's just such a crazy idea that it might work. After all of those outputs, whether they are and you can do it with just the input capacitor and the feedback capacitor. That'll give you the bandpass and the splitting of it to give you different frequencies. I could come up with fixed frequencies for mid, treble, and bass and run that. And then you'd have a sort of matrix where, much like this album that I've linked, this noise album like Merzbow that I've linked, where the in that noise album, The sound you're hearing as you hear the things shift and change, all of that stuff is going through 4049 hex inverter chips. The whole thing, the audio of that is coming out of a 4049 EQ that I made using exactly that. This is basically the schematic that I used. And I've always found that to be rather gratifying. I've never really pursued it any farther, but it wasn't something that I was chasing at the time. You run into issues where it's like, okay, so this is a tone color thing. You can't really make it be super flat. You can't really make it be super well behaved. But honestly, some of the stuff that I'm doing with trying to invent cool ways of mixing and stuff is very much like that. It's like working out some interesting way to do a result rather than trying to come up with a correct quote-unquote way of doing it. Haha, both. A EQ is a mixer. A EQ is a mixer because if you're talking about analog circuitry, an EQ is using this technology to split the audio into different frequency bands, and once you finish doing that, you need to mix them together again. Which means that it applies to all the same stuff, like the question about, like, can you do console as hardware? The answer is maybe. But if that answer is maybe, then what you're going to get is a mixer that has striking distortions that might be sonically desirable. And by sonically desirable, I mean different. Because one of the catches to all of this is you can go and try to design some crazy mixer with the parts wrong, where it's going to give you like old Creedence record style song sounds or whatever it is, when you'd have these really old giant tube consoles, and it's like, did that have a magic tone? Well, part of it is that it's not. These were not capable of doing mathematically precise outputs as a rule. These old circuit designs used things like transformers to isolate the voltages inside them. They used a bunch of technology where they were making the most of the limitations that they had, and as a result, you'd get stuff like that. You'd get like classic. Like the Pultec EQ is a classic EQ where it's passive. There aren't any amplifying stages in it. You got to be able to amplify it back up again. But it's a conglomeration of inductors and capacitors and things that you combine it together. And this is not going to give you like what you can get out of a SRC filter. They were woefully inadequate at doing that. You just couldn't. This is not going to give you what you get out of a digital linear phase filter. Any of that kind of stuff where the real precision is. But put 10 to build an equitable. What does an equitable mixer mean? And I assume you mean 10 just as a random idea, because you could put 32 or 128 to build a really giant mixer, and that would give you other problems. My brain is clicking on some of these ideas now, which is good, although I do also have to make plugins, because I have a plugin for next week, and I haven't decided which to do. That might be something that we can do today in the last hour of the stream, is figure out what plugin I do for next week. But with this kind of stuff, this messy diagram that I've made, that is how a mixer is designed. Like, if you wanted to have it so that each stage interacted with each other less, you'd have a larger resistance, in which case it would have a higher noise floor, and it would balance out the less interactivity probably less kind of congested sounding with a higher noise floor because there's more resistance for everything to get through, and you're having to do more amplification. Also, the more stages you've got, like this is 4 stages, and you could make 10 stages, or you could make 100 stages, or 1,000 stages, but you start running into diminishing returns. You start running into issues where if everything is kind of hooked together, then they get out of control and behave poorly. So you start having to use more resistances just to get everything to behave, and then you have to amplify more afterwards, and so on. Oh, how are you being selfish? What's a halt? Explain what a halt is, and I'll smooth it for you. But I've already done high whack-it. No, I want to find out what a halt is, a halt smoothing filter. Because, you know, there was one possibility that I was thinking about doing, and that was a multi-stage averager. Yeah, that's what a mixer would do. I'm not sure how parallel enters into it. But you mean several of these different ones? Yeah. Oh, no, statistical stuff. Let me go and look up what that means. I'll tell you whether it seems plausible or not. Holt Winter or Holt's linear trend, simple exponential smoothing. Okay, so I found it on Wikipedia. It's a rule of thumb technique. And the moving average past observations are weighted equally. Okay. Well, gosh, maybe I can do something like this. So what I'm looking at here is a algorithm. It looks kind of complicated, but I'm trying to work out how this is different from the moving average. Is this just an IIR filter? Is this only an IIR filter? Because they're throwing a lot of mathematical equations around here that I did not manage. Oh, dear. So double exponentials. You see, if you want an IIR filter, I've already made dozens of them. I'm using that frequently. And this double and triple exponential is what we'd call multipole in... Yeah, I'd want to see whether or not this is simply a simple IIR filter, because I'm already making those. So we're using window functions. I better get another piece of paper out. You may understand this well enough that with the use of a piece of paper and your advice, I'll be able to work out what the hell it is. Yeah, if you got a link to something that is less abstract than that. Exponentially weighted moving average. That's probably another Wikipedia. Yep, it's math. It's math. And I'm not sure if I can watch a YouTube video while making a YouTube video. That seems disturbingly recursive. I found an exponential moving average thing. So And so is this like it's like an IIR filter, except for it's like a moving average, which is an FIR filter, but the window is like. One thing about this new pen, it doesn't stink, and I can make big marks using it. So what you're saying is you'd like to have a filter that acts like this. That this would be a moving average, and it's a window function. But the exponential moving average is like that, except for that in theory it would go on forever. And it's taking a smaller and smaller chunk of the older stuff and applying it to the new stuff. Is that what we're talking about? All right, hold with a big question mark on it. Gotta love brush pens, gives me a big bold face. So the idea, because I can implement some of this stuff easy as pie. I'll get to your question in a moment, Doozer. I'm not going to spend the entire thing groveling over math, but well, you know, I'm always interested in having slight variations on basic things like filtration and stuff. This might end up being a better sounding low pass or high pass, and that would be made of win. The question is whether I can do it with multiple. I'd want to implement this with IIR filters. I wouldn't want to do it as just like an FIR, which is only this many and no more, and it's only applying this. Instead, I'd want to come up with a way where I could use multiple IIR filters or banks of IIR filters and apply it like maybe the one filter applies the ratio of the next filter, and the farther it dissipates, the less it affect, because that's but it should have an infinite tail in order for it to be an infinite impulse response, which is what IIR stands for. Bank of IIR. So the idea would be coming in, and the funny thing about it is that this initial stuff, you would have less of a effect than doing just a straight up moving average, because the straight up moving average has a very specific window and it really wipes out all the really high frequency stuff, whereas this would start off with getting close to just a 2-point moving average. So, you know, this might actually be what you'd call an epiphenomenon of the idea that I wanted to try with multiple poles of simple 2-pole average filters. I better make a note of that, because that would be a big change. A look-back function? Explain what a look-back function is. you do that, and I'll be writing down has a look back function. The great thing about this kind of stuff is that people use all kinds of language to describe things, and then it might end up being so high amplitude, high frequency. See, I'm wondering if that's like, I'm going to have to search on that. Yeah, because sure enough, if you were doing a in plug-in terms, what you'd be probably talking about is some kind of slew function, because high amplitude, high frequency means sudden slew, sudden massive changes in things. So you're producing a I'm going to have to look for what look back might mean. But hold function look back. See, I'm not sure if I'm necessarily following this, but we are getting results out of Google for it, so there's that. It's trying to predict the future. I'm not sure what that, that would be negative delay compensation, right? Oh. Yeah. So what you're saying is the first filter is straight up heavy low pass. And then a second function is like a dry wet or something. It's checking back one step. So that's referring to the previous sample. You see, that could definitely be an audio algorithm. You're absolutely right about that. So yeah, first filter would be heavy low pass. The second one refers to the previous sample and sets the intensity. So what that would do in audio terms is act like acceleration. I've already got the acceleration plugin, and the acceleration plugin strongly resists sudden departures of frequency. Here, what I will do is I'm going to save that because I'm not going to go and watch a video, but I will save your YouTube video in the hopes that it'll be of some help. Boop. Pulse method example. That's only 9 minutes long. I will go and watch it and see if it helps any. It's the thing about it. I'm looking at what I got with the Holt algorithm here from a simple search and a login rate to a website and spikiness, an overall trend, and a weird artifact produced by something going on there. They're doing a interpolation that seems to try to reconstruct. They're producing a window, and it's like they're trying to reconstruct what's previously been happening. So that's weird. I'm not sure to what extent that is relevant. It's a predictive idea. Oh, there's no more coffee. You know, if I start doing longer streams like this, because we got about 40 or so minutes left, and one of my possible Patreon rewards that I'll start doing is offer to go longer and longer with the streams, or do more of them per week if I reach certain goals and stay there. So that could be a thing. That's a nice straight up trade of my time and energy and attention for money, and we'll see how that works. But for now, I'm going to look back a little bit and see whether there was anything I missed when talking about. Doozer was asking a question, and I was just talking about hold functions and didn't answer it. Indie EDM acts that use kicks that have incredible room sound. A processing change to achieve a roomy kick. This is an interesting question. There's some stuff that I hope to be coming out with. Notably, Pocket Verbs is still coming up. And I've learned some new things that would affect Pocket Verbs or affect that style of doing stuff. Namely, you might be able to see this box here. This is the original MIDI verb. And the first and second MIDI verbs were running on a platform that did not have, I guess you'd call it, floating point multiplies. They were running on a platform where they could work with sounds and sample values and things like that, but they couldn't do certain kinds of math. So all of the gain changes applied by this unit inside in its computer are effectively using bit shift gain. And there goes my YouTube video because they think I said a naughty word. YouTube listens to what you say and it will judge you based on the word it thought you said. Bit shift gain is simply a 6 dB change, and this box did not have a multiply that could do a correct all-pass filter, which is 0.618. So it did all-pass filters that were 0.5 every time. And that's part of why it gets the sound that it does. And since people know, like, well, if you do an all-pass filter, it only works correctly if you do 0.618, or possibly golden ratio, because I think it's a golden ratio. That's what I think the all-pass filter number really is, because it's, if you smell a constant lurking around somewhere, it's like, maybe if I added more decimal points, it would become more like itself. But this one couldn't do that, and yet it has an amazing sound, and I'm pretty sure I can identify why. It's because all the digital math in its primitive little brain is being done in such a way where the mantissa is not getting degraded. So it limits the amounts of algorithms it can do, and there's only so many sounds it can make, and it's just a small number of basic algorithms inside it at different lengths and levels. But they have a special sound to them because they're not correct, but they're not correct in a way that involves the digital data inside not being degraded where it might be degraded. And all of the ones ever since, apparently, as near as I can tell, the reason that digital reverbs don't have the tone of this guy is because the correct value for doing an all-pass filter is 6.8. And they all use the correct value because it does the right thing, and they're missing out on that retaining of the mantissa without altering it every single iteration through. So there is food for thought. That's something that I'd very much like to play with. So rooms on indie kick drums. What do I have already that would work for that? I would have to say if you needed to put room using a reverb or something on it, I'm going to look back at the question. Because I got various stuff. Yeah. See, the thing about golden ratio is it is a mathematical constant. And they're also, when you're doing an all-pass filter for reverbs, they have you use 0.618, which is the beginning of the golden ratio. So I've tended to assume if you wanted to do the ideal all-pass filter constant, you would be using golden ratio on it. And I've been discovering, after learning that about this, that you could also use simply 0.5 for all your all-passes, and then they wouldn't work properly as all-passes, but you'd have better sound. So that's a trade-off I'm very much willing to make. But I would have to say nonlinear space. And what you do with that is nonlinear space is a reverb plugin. And you can set it to either sort of sustain reverby sound, except when audio is coming in, which would change it. Yeah. The firework collection is impulse response reverbs. Nonlinear space is the algorithmic reverb, and that's different. What you'd be doing, I believe, is using the nonlinearity of it so that, and I'm not familiar enough with this indie stuff to know exactly what you're trying to do. It's a question of which you'd rather. Is it supposed to be, maybe you can answer this and I can help answer your question better through doing it. Is it a matter of the ambience being this big fluff around the sound that makes it fill out and be dense and thick, or is it a matter of there being a sustained rumbling going on? Because there's two ways of using nonlinear space. Since it's a nonlinear decay, what you can do is you take it one direction, and it tries to gate itself. It becomes like a gated verb. And you'd be using that by putting it on your kick drum. Probably not having other stuff on the thing. You'd put it on just only the kick drum. Because that would mean that the input would be quieter more often. And when nonlinear space goes nonlinear on stuff, if you had other things like snare drum coming in, that would tend to make it continue to sustain. Using nonlinear space on just only a kick drum and setting it turning up the nonlinearity as far as you can would mean that you'd be turning down the decay as much as you could. And probably also, I'm not sure how much of this is supposed to be rumble and how much of this is supposed to be like, but you'd be using the filters to dial in your sound. And, oh, hi, Kenora, Inhe Topolbari. Where do I live? Oh, the places I'll live. When you're doing nonlinear space, on just a kick drum sound. Oh. So you are looking for a big thunder. I think some of your indie rock stuff is probably being done through just undamped bass drums. I honestly think that's probably part of it. I have been playing drums for a long time, and there's all different kinds of stuff you can do with letting the drum be undamped and continuing to shake around. Hey, slugger dude. I might have another troll, and I might just have an enthusiastic person from somewhere else. Oh, no, it's one of your friends. Oh, dear me. And the thing about it is, you want that lowest rumble to die away faster. Oh, I don't know. I don't have much respect for USA junk. I am kind of treacherous as far as that's concerned. I have very little patience for a lot of USA junk. A bit of it can be very junky indeed. I try to be the less junky part. So, you're going to turn up the nonlinearity on nonlinear space and turn down the decay. And what that's going to do is increase the nonlinearity. Increase the decay as the sound is loud. And then the quieter it gets, the more the decay gets shorter. So you end up getting a, it's like a gated reverb sound. But you might want to be making it different than that, because you don't want it to be like all Phil Collins and stuff. Talk in lowercase letters, please. I can answer in some ways, but I'm also busy explaining things to people. Yeah, and I'm not sure whether they would necessarily want to kill the attack on the kick for the reverb send. If you were doing that, you could do it using my swell plugin. The swell plugin will do that. It'll be able to take the attack off, and that would actually work. I don't know if I have anything. I don't know if I have if nonlinear space is as aggressive about gating stuff as it could be. But it's going to be in the same basic area, because it's going to make a large reverby rumble that then shuts itself back off again. And it's not like putting a output of the it's not necessarily a troll, it's just some odd person with questions about things. Everybody knows it's not really a secret location. But I think that is probably the end of my answer for that. I've done my best to continue to... oh, dude, I'll tell you what I work in life. Give me a second. I'll give you something. And it's actually a nice thing, because there's no reason I shouldn't give you nice things. Your windows. They might have never seen what I do. So we will turn away wrath by doing this. Check this out. Boop. Can you link to that? It should be a zip file. If you can follow that link, and that might actually work. If you can follow that link, then you can download all of the audio plugins, audio units and VSTs for Mac, PC, and Linux. Free. So when you ask what I work in life, I would say that is my life work, and that is what I've done. And I am giving it to you for nothing. Judging from the way that you're posting, I'm not sure you necessarily have a lot of disposable income to throw around. Oh, no. Well, in that case, let me answer it better. airwindows.com, top left, and find newupdates.zip. Download that, and you will have more than 150 audio plugins, Audio Unit, VST, and that's Mac and Windows and Linux VST, that you can use free. That is the idea of what I'm doing with all this stuff. And this is, oh, you know English well enough to be able to type it. You know English pretty good. And you don't technically need to know English to be able to use these. They are there for you to use. You're speaking English just fine. Fine enough for us to be able to understand you, and hopefully fine enough for me to be able to give you these plugins that I do. So yeah, those are downloadable using that zip file. And this actually might be my friend that I'm going to check in on this evening. I'm not sure. Could be. Every now and then I'll have interesting visitors. We'll just put it that way. So there I am. I'm setting you up with Audio Unit and VST plugins for 3 different platforms. Go and use them. And no, don't load up DC Voltage and ULA first. Unless they want to. I mean, how do you know that this person doesn't want to? Maybe they would like to do that. So while this is going on, anybody got a real question? Because I will certainly try to also do real questions. Yep. That is very much what this is. One of my users, yeah, don't call them names, come on. One of my users just tipped me off to this, which is some kind of financial calculation thing, and I'm going to try to make an audio plugin. So, David, do you have a question then? Cool, shoot. Well, we can only try. Oh, no! Fucking magnets. How do they work? You know, I can't tell you off the top of my head. They do. I do, in fact, do studio music, but I do plugins, and that's what this is about. Kind of like product, but it's free. Yeah, if I didn't have YouTube mad at me for the bit shift gain, I'd have them mad at me now for, man, all these new faces. So I think what you're getting would depend very much on who you are and what you mean by that. Hey, Martin. Oh, is there a Margus has something? So, what if you're putting Paffinetti on the master bus? What you're going to want to do is lower harmonics. I don't think you're going to want to use the upper harmonics for the master bus. It's just going to, the thing about lower harmonics is that because Paffinetti works the way that it does, because it's a Chebyshev filter, if you are using just second or third harmonic, it's not going to alias until you start throwing really high frequencies on there. And if you're on the master bus, you're going to have high frequencies, but they're going to be at a lower level. And the lower frequencies that are going to be taking up more room are going to be pretty much guaranteed not to alias. So my answer there is that's a fine idea. It's just as good as using some of my softer transfer function distortions. Because if you're doing, you see, there's a distinction on the master bus between softer distortions like density, sine wave based, where it'll give sort of thickness and body to the sound and make it sort of fat and move it forwards in the sound stage, but you're also altering the tone, versus hard clipping, like something like 80 clip, which is controlled controlled high frequency clipping is what 80 clip does. And that is a very sharp break, and that has lots of aliases and artifacts when you do that. So if you're doing PAF Nutty, you're probably wanting to do why, I mean, shirt. I wear my shirt for my plugin videos. I wear a fancy white shirt for the plugin videos, and I have to deck myself out. This is the question and answer session where I get to be a lot more informal than that. So I think that with PAF Nutty, you're going to want to focus on lower harmonics for the master bus. Yeah, I am in Vermont. That's one place that I am. And Vermont has been cold in recent weeks, although it's warming up at the moment. Right now, it's still warmer than 70 degrees. When I get up in the morning, it's like 60 or colder. So, that is not to say that you couldn't use, say, if you do all of the odd harmonics, you wind up getting something that's closer to a square wave function, but it's still sharply band limited. Oh, yeah? Yeah, I've got some friends in Australia, and they are just roasting down there. Oh, okay. 01X, Martin, if I'm not mistaken. You should tell me more about this while I'm still here and streaming, as I might be able to answer whatever it is you're talking about. I don't remember where you sent me the screen image, but I have been sent. People get into these private chats with me a lot, so depending upon where it is, sometimes I don't even know that they are sending things. Take it easy, Jolie. So yeah, in the absence of, I'm going to look back and see whether I can make better sense of that. Martin, also known as 01X, has sent me screenshots about something. Yeah, you settle down, Serbian, whose name I can't pronounce. I wish I could pronounce it because I would try. You guys don't fight with each other, please. But so little distracted, I guess. Yeah, no, Air Windows people come from all over the world. It's definitely not just USA. It never has been. I have had a lot of Scandinavian folks, so I'm not surprised about the Norway, because it's always been, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and stuff. And I like that because my heritage goes back to Finland as well. It's why I have a Subaru Sloga. Okay, I'll try to remember your name. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, correct me. Sloga. Oh, I don't know Cyrillic because I'm a dumb American. I don't know what better to tell you. I know English very well, but I don't know other languages well, which is typical for dumb Americans. There's only so much you can know in one life, and languages were not one of the things I was good at. But so Martin has a screen image. If you could tell me where you sent this to me, I could go and have a look. And failing that, I'm not sure where to go with that because I don't know what thing you're referring to. I do think I'm going to get some mileage out of this hold look back function, though. We're doing a filter, and there might be a way of doing a filter that. Oh, is that why you're pissed? Oh, Nicola, is that why you're posting? Because I recently put a plugin called PathNutty. Actually, that's completely confused. I got all mixed up because I was like Nicola, but I'm thinking Tesla rather than Chebyshev. Meh. Okay, let me go and quickly have a look, see what we got. As long as I'm here. Watch how it's like Gotze or something. Oh, the internet is weird. Let's see what we got. Oh, so Martin did ask, do I accept MoneyGram? I don't have bank account. If you don't have a bank account, don't pay me. Keep it yourself. If things start working out better for you, then, or if you wind up with so much money that you need a bank account, then we can talk about whether you need to give me money. Oh yeah, I've been following your comments, and I've been like, the WordPress has been banishing some of your comments sometimes, so I have to go through and approve them. And so I've been doing that when I see them coming through. You've got a whole bunch of different, like Martin has a bunch of different remarks here. I don't see any of them as pictures, but you're mostly talking about 64 bits. So I'm going to read off some of this stuff. I'm an old man and I don't always have clean hair. That's why. So Martin's been talking a lot on the website, and how to run 64-bit just to use ditherfloat. In many ways, you don't have to worry about ditherfloat. Technically, it's a way that you could dither to 32-bit float, but it's not an important thing. I include it with the plugins because with the plugins, you're on Mac especially, or on anything like that, you've got to return to 32-bit all the time, and I don't like doing that. No, no, Nicola, I'm alone. I'm trying to figure out what Martin was saying. Yeah, Swell gives you 64-bit readings. I'm having a hard time. Your English is okay, Nicola. Your English is okay. It's certainly okay enough for me to do it. I'm having a similar problem with Martin because Martin was posting stuff at Air Windows. It's a lot of comments, but I'm struggling with Martin's English a little bit too. And I don't know what the... I mean, I can understand, do you accept MoneyGram? I don't have bank account, in which I say, no, don't give me money. If you wind up with so much money that you do have a bank account, then we can talk. But take care of yourself first. But for sending me a picture, I don't see a picture. I see a lot of links to like Wikipedia and 64-bit sound, and I've looked at some of those, but I don't see a picture, and I don't see an unapproved comment, unless it's in the trash. Oh! I found the comment. Let me go and dig it out. WordPress hid it from me. Let me go and find that. I gotta make WordPress put your comment back because it took your comment and put it in the trash without me doing anything about it. There we go. And pending. And approve, and now your comment should show up on the website. Now I'm going to see what the picture is, and it is not Gotze. It is a picture, Martin posted a picture of Swell, and it's the 62-bit thing. Yeah, Nicola, don't you worry about paying me money either. Don't Don't worry about any of that kind of stuff. It's fine. And Jolie, and Nicola, don't fight, please. If you do, I can't stop you. But I see I found your screenshot. I posted it. I approved it on the website, so now other people can see it, and I see it myself. You got a bit shift gain going, and you're asking what it's doing in bitter. And well, here's one thing. If you are trying to dither to float, dither should be 1. Dither should not be 0. Dither should be 1. So if you are trying to dither to 32-bit, you need to turn that dither knob up and keep the offset knob down. All right. Now, as to what it's doing on x64, if dither float is dithering to 32-bit, it is not itself going, well, hang on. Maybe I'm wrong. Interesting. No, I'm 50 years old, man. I'm getting older and older. I'll probably end up dying one of these days. But for now, I'm still doing live streams and making plugins and stuff. My age is not secret at all. I am more than 50 years old. So I'm trying to figure out what the specific question was, because that was a little challenging. Let's go back to comments. Explain basic topics. So you'd like not to be explaining basic topics because that's what the internet is for. Okay, well, what you'd like to have me, I'll read it off. Yeah, don't have any fun with the trolls. They're not trolls. They're just people that are sometimes weird people from various places. And there's lots of places on the internet where, life is rough. And you come and you talk to these American people who are all driving around in their giant trucks and stuff and being like, I'm super important. And if you're posting from, like, I don't know, some bombed out building or something like that, then you don't want to have any patience with that kind of stuff. So learning to see things from other people's points of view is worthwhile, even when it's kind of weird or challenging, or when people are messing with you. Because, people can mess with you too. It's all cool. So I'm going to read off Martin's question, since I still got like some minutes or so of live streaming. Martin says, what I would like you to explain is something that does not exist for now in any place, and many people in all the sites could think that is not possible, because it clearly would not exist within the parameters of this information, and it would not enter their minds either. And it is like doing to roll audio in 64 bits on a bus of 32, since I hear it is possible with your plugins. I don't know what doing to roll means. And this would be a case similar to dither float, where the impossible becomes a tangible reality. Well, I do that as often as I can. It would only be necessary for the master of puppets. Okay, that's Metallica. To decide to give us a solution. If you don't want to do it, teach us how to program. I'll be happy to try to do that too. And for sure we will do it, or keep us in the line of knee science, but make it possible. If I'm understanding what you're saying, absolutely, I would love to try to do that. Oh, Nicola, I dropped out of college. I am a college dropout. I'm a bum. I don't have the schooling. That's why I had to do Air Windows. That's why I had to start programming things and doing stuff on my own. I made most of my guitars myself. None of them are fancy guitars. That's not true. At least one of them has a real. Two of them have a real guitar neck. Those are Fender necks, but they're on like crazy other guitars from other places, and I just sort of built them. I would absolutely like to be able to teach people how to do, and this is one of the reasons why I'm doing stuff like trying to put together Eurorack modules and coming up with ways of using like perf board and parts and showing people what parts these are and talking about them. I spent the whole beginning of this video talking about the 4049 hex inverter chip, which is a 26-cent chip. People should be able to build this stuff properly. You know, people should be able to build things out of parts and take care of themselves. And if I can encourage people to do more of that, then it's all to the good. You know, I'd like that. So yeah, so far, Martin was asking about Swell, and I still got 5 minutes or so. I don't have any women. No, I live alone. Swell. You get 64-bit readings. Well, no, I tried it, but I tried being gay, and I didn't like it as much. When Swell gives you 64-bit readings, that's because you're using it on a 64-bit bus. And if you're changing anything, the Hofner, I think, is upstairs now. I have a Hofner that has a knob on one of the tuning machines because it fell over and broke. How long have I been on the internet? Too damn long. Oh, man. I got on the internet on a Performa 575 computer that was 33 megahertz. And at 14.4 modem. So yeah, I think, Martin, the reason that you're getting 64-bit readings is because you're on a 64-bit calculation bus, and it is taking your input signal, whether or not it is meh. Some of my best friends are trolls, don't worry about it. It is doing a gain change. Swell does, come on guys. Some of my best friends are trolls. I'd still like them to not be yelling at each other the entire time. Oh no, I'm not going to. If I ban Jolie, why would I not ban you? No, we're not doing that. I don't even have any mods. If I did, they'd have jumped all over your shit. So, yeah. The reason you're getting 64-bit readings from Bitter is because Swell is doing a gain change, so it's filling up all of the bits, even if you're starting out with something like 16 bits or something. So that's normal. If you're doing any kind of calculation on a long word length bus, then it's going to start using more of the... No, I'm not going to ban you. I like you. You're fun to have around. For everybody but Jolie. That's not true, but whatever. So does that answer your question, Martin? As far as... Aw. Poor Nicola. The readings you're getting in Bitter appear to be pretty much correct. There's nothing wrong about that. Yeah, you realize we could have a internet amusement Q&A as well. There's nothing stopping that from happening. As you can see, I can kind of focus on technical questions even while dealing with silliness. And a little silliness makes things amusing. So I guess we'll see how it works out. You know, on the music stream that I do, I've had people get really mad at me because I wasn't responding to them. And in the music stream, I can't see anything you're saying. That's the Tuesday. The music stream that I'm doing is literally just playing music through the system and playing all that kind of stuff. And I can't see anybody's comments while doing it. In fact, a lot of the time I'm looking at the synthesizers or whatever and listening to it. I remember your name, Nicola, if that is indeed your name. I could disable the chat in the video stream if I wanted or needed to. I mean, it takes some effort to actually put the chat together. I have to open it up as a special window. And here, I'll do a magic trick. Check this out. We can make the window go away like that. Ah, they went. You're gone. And now you're back. So yes, beware, I can make you disappear out of the stream. So now the time has run out and I have to leave, except for I'm not going to leave instantly, but I'll be heading out and like resuming my Minecrafting activities or whatever. Okay, so Nicola. Sounds good. So yeah, are we basically done? Like, I don't think anybody had a pressing, ooh, now they're seeing the fading away. I don't think anybody had any pressing questions left over, but I'll be back next week. So everybody can be back next week and we'll see how we can manage this herd of, because you got to remember, like anybody who is coming to this, do not either hate Russia. Dude, don't talk about me hating Russia. The only reason I have Linux VST plugins is because a Russian hacker knew that better than me. And I was asking for help, and none of the Americans and none of the plugin developers were helping me. And this dude in Russia was like, oh, I know how to compile Linux VST. Why don't you do this? And they had the correct answer, and they did it. And now I have Linux VST because open source people work together. Across countries, you don't care about any of that kind of stuff. So don't ever talk about me hating Russia. There are people in Russia that have helped me and you and all of us a huge amount. And I will not stand for that kind of talk. So, and I'm not going to get dragged into other questions about other things that other clever people in Russia have done. That's a whole other story, believe me. But we're going to be coming back next week and seeing what we make of this strange conglomeration of people. But one of the things I was going to mention is that this is a musician and DIYer and hacker crowd. So it's almost like I feel that like my Air Windows crew is pretty unshockable as a rule. Very multinational. Very, I don't know, rock and roll or hip hop or whatever. And it is the sort of thing where this is not a pile of boring people who have not seen the world and who have no imagination. The folks that come to my streams are very interesting and have a much broader view of stuff than that. So it's less easy to shock people with just like carrying on. And Martin, you should be continue asking me questions because it's hard for me to understand what you're asking. It took me like 12 messages to work out what you were asking about the first question, and I think I got some of it, and I think I answered some of it. I will continue to answer you in the next QA. And I will see what I can do as far as that. But the challenges are when I'm like working through a language barrier and struggling to get it to work out what you mean. I will absolutely answer you the next QA, and if I didn't answer you correctly, then help me out by sort of feeding me the correct questions, and I'll see what I can do with it. So, yeah. Nicola, I'm tempted to say Russian techno. It would be a bit of a lie, though. There is a great documentary out. Maybe I'll try to figure it out, how to link to it before I go, so I don't have to run away or anything like that. And Kvadrat, yes. Let me post that. Go and find that documentary. It is a brilliant documentary about a Russian DJ playing some of the best techno house music you will hear, and that is where that genre is really happening, that I can tell. It's very focused in on like the essence of what started in Detroit, and I'm deeply impressed with how well like Eastern Bloc techno is doing these days. And the guy in the video who is doing his DJing and performing all over the world, he's going to all these different countries and stuff. The DJ is filmed performing at these different clubs and then traveling a lot and then going back to his apartment, and he lives like us. He lives like me and a lot of my Air Windows customers, where you've got some records and they're lying up against a wall and you're sleeping in a mattress on the floor, and you maybe have 2 sets of sheets and keep using them until they need to get laundered and stuff. And it's relatable. This Kvadrat documentary is showing a guy. I think it's almost without words. There is some dialogue, but not that much. But it's just very relatable. And what I listen to, say on YouTube, there's a bunch of different dub techno channels, and dub techno is something that I like a lot. Of course, dub is from the Jamaican reggae style, and then techno, of course, is out of Detroit. Also, Berlin did very, very good things in techno. There's another documentary that I have up here somewhere, and it is about a particular Berlin club. I'm trying to remember now what the hell it was. Tresor. That club and Jolie settle down. You're only feeding the troll. You're feeding the troll on purpose, but I'm running over just to hang with you crazy peoples. Oh no, now we're gonna have words. Techno is shit. Oh, you're in trouble now. But the Tresor Club doesn't exist anymore because capitalists destroyed it. But it was a German techno club in a bank vault, deep underground. It was one of the loudest. Clubs you could have, partly because of the thickness of the walls. And there's a whole kind of techno that you can play that works really well in a confined loud space like that. And there's a documentary on Tresor. I forget what its name is. After 2 hours of grappling with all of this, I'm a little fatigued. But that also is a very worthwhile, as long as I'm dripping around. Tresor Club documentary. Yep, Sub Berlin. So that is, actually, no, Tony, we're actually 10 minutes over. But Sub Berlin, the story of Tresor, is an amazing documentary. And go and find it and enjoy it. I actually have it as a DVD. That's how much I liked it. I like getting DVDs of real things sometimes rather than just downloading it all. Because when you download stuff, you wind up having these MP4s and things, and it's all lossy compressed. And DVD is still lossy compressed, but there's more data coming through as you experience it a little bit more. So, with the recommendation of Kvadrat and Sub Berlin story of Tresor, I will bid you folks adieu. And goodbye to the chat. Remember, I can do this. What? And goodbye to you folks. It's been fun. It's been a weird one this time, but that's all cool. And I was able to answer some questions, and I got some ideas for a possible new plugin. We'll see whether we see that next week. If we do, you will all be able to download it for free. Bye-bye.